Uranium and the nuclear industry. We take a look at what we dig up here in Australia, where it goes and how it's disposed of, coming up on the show. From Melbourne, you're watching The World from Below. I'm Lizzie O'Shea. Tonight we're joined by our guests Dr. Bill Williams and Dave Sweeney. Dr. Bill Williams is a past president of the Australian branch of the Medical Association for the Prevention of War. Bill is a general practitioner with over 25 years' experience in community medicine. He has worked as a primary care physician in remote Aboriginal communities in Australia's Western Desert and in post-conflict zones in Latin America and Africa. His research, writing and teaching interests include the risks associated with the nuclear fuel chain, the roots of violence and the health of Aboriginal Australians. Dave Sweeney is the Australian Conservation Foundation's nuclear-free campaigner. ACF supports a nuclear-free future for Australia. For 3 decades, Dave has watched, written about and worked around nuclear resources and Indigenous issues in Australia. We start today's program by looking at the current state of Australia's policy on uranium mining. Around 40% of the world's uranium reserves are in Australia. We currently supply around 20% of the global market for nuclear energy, with exports of around 10,000 tonnes of uranium oxide, otherwise known as yellow cake, each year. Tell us, Dave, what is the current policy in respect of Australian uranium mining and where is it heading?
Lizzie, the current situation is that the two major parties both strongly support uranium mining on a federal level. So there's a bipartisan federal position that is that we should just treat this like any other mineral and rip it and ship it to whoever basically wants to sell it, buy it. On a state level, it's a bit more complicated. In Central Australia, in South Australia and the Northern Territory, there's bipartisan state support. In Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, there's not. Labor Party's opposed, coalition supports, there's no bipartisan support for the industry. So the big picture is a picture where there's been a retreat from responsibility from the two major parties that see this as an ordinary mineral, which it's not, and cut corners to fast track its extraction and its export.
Tell us, Dr. Bill Williams, what are the health risks of uranium mining?
Well, it is a mineral, as Dave says, and so mining the mineral inevitably has some consequences which are consistent in other mining, such as the social consequences and, for example, the heavy metals which get into the environment as a consequence of the mining. But the real particular feature of uranium mining is the fact that uranium and its decay products are highly toxic in the long term. Uranium in different configurations has an activity which can last for hundreds of thousands of years. Some of the isotopes last for millions of years. And so that means that if the uranium and its decay products are mobilised in the environment, it can represent a health risk for many generations. When uranium's sitting in the Earth's crust underground, it doesn't represent a really significant health issue. But once it's mined and mobilised, it gets into dust, it moves in the air, it moves in the atmosphere, it moves in the water. And although uranium itself is not the most toxic of metals, some of its byproducts in its decay chain, particularly radon gas and some of its disintegrating particles like lead, bismuth, polonium, these things have short half-lives and are highly active toxins. They get into our food chain, they get into human beings, they have a capacity to disrupt the very building blocks of life, the DNA in our cells, and that's how they cause cancer, and they cause other types of diseases, cardiac disease, respiratory disease, and also have the potential, by virtue of the fact that they affect the DNA, the chromosomes in our cells, they have the capacity to make generational change. So they can potentially cause so-called hereditable diseases. So a disease that can be passed on from one generation to the next. That's in many ways the gravest concern of such a long-lived poison.
And those risks are for people who are living near the area where it's mined. It's not just in the case of an accident. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's correct. A uranium mine inevitably, mobilises these long-lived toxins into the environment. So the people who are mining the uranium and the people who live in the immediate vicinity are at highest risk. But of course, when you're thinking about a poison that exists in the environment for potentially for tens of thousands of years, then it can be mobilised. I mean, we've all seen the maps showing the way dust storms can move from Central Australia to Sydney or even to New Zealand within a matter of a few days. So if there are radiological toxins in that dust, then they can be distributed across the country quite rapidly.
Dave, I did want to talk about, though, accidents when they do happen. There was a recent spill at the Ranger uranium mine in Kakadu. Can you tell us about the environmental impacts of that? It
was a spectacular spill. In the early hours of a Saturday morning last December, there was a big leach tank which just basically unzipped. Metal fatigue, stress, and it just collapsed without warning. And over 1 million litres, 1.3 million litres of a highly acidic uranium slurry spilled out of the area and moved out of the zone. And that was the latest in what's been a litany, Lizzie, of extremely significant issues and problems. And probably the deepest concern is that this footprint of mismanagement and release and exposure and problem is growing. So as the mine gets older, the infrastructure at that mine site gets under pressure. There's metal fatigue, there's management fatigue, and that's a dangerous combination. And so what we're seeing is a regular in an increasing set of impacts both on the Ranger mine site itself and noticeable and documentable impacts outside of the Ranger mine site and in the surrounding Kakadu National Park.
It's obviously a very delicate ecosystem. Do you know what attempts have been made to clean up that spill?
There's been significant attempts made to clean up that spill. Like, it was a large part of it was quarantined. There was a lot of basic earth moving, like scraping and replacing like dried sediments in a waste dump on the mine site. Probably one of the biggest questions at Ranger, though, is that they've got a lease at that mine. It's a mine that was imposed against the wishes of the traditional Aboriginal owners. Started operations in the early 1980s. It's Australia's longest running uranium mine, and it's inside Australia's largest national park, World Heritage listed area. And national parks, World Heritage, uranium mine, it's not a good mix, it's not good neighbours. And they've got a lease, the company Energy Resources of Australia, owned by Rio Tinto, have got a lease at that mine till the 8th of January 2021. On the 8th of January 2021, that's it. Midnight, that's it. The bell has rung, it's over and out for Rio Tinto for uranium mining, and they've got to clean up the Ranger lease to a standard where it could be incorporated into the adjacent and surrounding Kakadu National Park. Now, for 30 years, they've been treating that lease like an industrial mine site, which it's been. And now it's just starting to dawn on regulators, the company and others, that they have to clean up, and they have to clean up to a pretty high standard. It's a high bar. And the company is now positioning to say we mightn't have the money. And Rio Tinto, the parent company, is positioning to say, well, we don't have a legal responsibility. So there's a question about the commitment of Rio Tinto, there's a question about the capacity of Energy Resources of Australia, and there's a question about the long-term future of our largest national park.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back after that to speak further with our guests about what we do with uranium once we've dug it out of the ground. Stay with us.